All right. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I think it's the first year where NOAH is dedicating so much attention to digital native vertical brands, and it's great to see. Maybe let me introduce myself and H-Roads in a few minutes. So we're a global VC firm. In fact, we have offices across Asia, Europe, and the US. And in total, that's more or less 6 billion of venture money under investment. And we mostly focus on scale-ups, so companies that have passed initial product market fit. We invest not only in consumer, actually, we do enterprise and fintech as well, but consumer has been a big focus of ours, both in terms of marketplaces and e-commerce, but more and more in terms of the direct-to-consumer vertical brands. And I think when Marco from NOAH reached out and said, hey, would you give a speech about how you as VCs define the space, I tried a little bit to think, so what does that mean, right? Like, what do we mean by DNVBs? And so that term, DNVBs, actually was originally invented by the Bonobos founder, who effectively was one of the first companies to pretty much invent this space and completely radically change the way brands address their customers. And this is one attempt to define what we call direct-to-consumer brands, and I'm sure there are many others. But one way to look at it is direct sourcing of materials. So that effectively means you control your supply chain. You're the one either designing and even producing products, or at least having a very close control of your production. And why is that important is because you can not only control the quality of the products, but you can also have a very quick loop of data in terms of what people like, what do you want to change, and very quickly iterate. And you've seen it in the fast fashion world, I think, invented a little bit by Inditex and Zara. There is a very quicker cycle in terms of delivering products and being able to iterate. And so if you look at one of our investments, Made.com, which plays in the furniture category, they're doing a great job at very quickly changing their production and their catalog based on demand and based on customer data. The second thing is direct distribution. And so that's effectively why this whole category is called vertically integrated, because they're going direct to customers, meaning they have a direct relationship, they don't go through intermediaries. And again, why does that matter? I think the first thing is obviously you get much better margins as a benefit. So if you look at those new brands, typically 50 to 60% gross margin, which is much better than a typical e-commerce play. But there is more to it. I think you have a direct ability to tell a story and discuss to your customers. And again, I think it's around the data. So with that feedback, you're able to generate new products. And if you look at companies like Lucile in the US in the makeup category, they went all the way to ask customers, so what do you want us to develop? What's the next product you want us to sell? And that's invaluable data that you don't have if you're going through distributors. The result, and I think some of the characteristics we like about those companies is there is a very strong focus on the brand. What is the experience? What is the narrative we want to give? And usually a very strong design as well. And I would argue, and I think we'll go through that in terms of what do we like in terms of investors, that focus on having a differentiated story is pretty important to the value of these companies. Finally, high engagement on social media. You all know that. All those companies typically have built really good communities. Again, Glossier is a very good example. That's a company that started as a blog. I think for a long time, 90% of their customers were coming through social channels, in particular Instagram. And the last thing is a lot of those brands are appealing to younger demographics, millennials and Generation Z. And that's also part of the strategic attractivity of these companies is if you're a large FMCG, those are typically customers you're struggling to get. So again, nothing really new. I mean, VCs have noticed, and there's been a lot of capital deployed in the space. As you can see, I mean, I was just looking, Warby Parker and companies like that were founded in 2010, right? So it's not a new category. I think what's interesting here is just to see it keeps on growing. And when I was preparing the speech, I was thinking, what are the views around that space? And you'll hear some people say, we've reached saturation. Now all the categories have been played out. There is, 10 companies in meal replacement, 10 companies in so-and-so in mattresses. That's over. I don't believe that. I think actually this is a complete new ways of selling, and I think we'll see much more to come. That said, there are a few challenges. And some of them, again, you'll be pretty familiar with them. The obvious one is obviously with all the VC money pouring into that ecosystem, there has been a dramatic rise in CPCs, which is effectively cost per click, but also cost of acquisition in general, in particular with social. And that can be a challenge because some of those brands rely heavily on social to convince new customers. And obviously, the companies that were started 5, even 10 years ago, have a huge advantage because the cost of acquisition was cheaper back then. And so the overall rise of the category has meant that it becomes harder and harder to play in the market. I think there are ways around it. You look at a lot of companies, including our investments, and we're investors in a few, have very strong community. I think, obviously, repeat is also another mechanism where, hopefully, if you do a good job, customers come back and you don't have to reacquire them. And I think people are getting more creative around what are the channels to replace the social, but that's certainly a challenge. I think another thing we face, especially here in Europe, and that's nothing specific to consumer, but Europe is very fragmented. And I think it's obvious in the consumer market because the needs and the taste and the go-to-market can be pretty different from when you go from Germany to France to Nordics. And if you compare to the United States, where it's one country, one language, and pretty much one unified strategy, it's not easy when you start in Europe. Another point I listed here is Amazon. What I mean by Amazon is, I actually was looking at the number, but Amazon is getting more and more into the brand game, and actually they've launched a lot of white label and private label brands that they sell on their own platform. And I think it's already 8 billion of revenue and forecasted to be 22. And you won't know, right? So those are different names. I had them here, but you won't necessarily recognize that they're Amazon one. And Arabella, Larkenrow, Nupro, Small Parts. So you wouldn't know they're effectively private label of Amazon, and that's Amazon's way of playing that brand game. So definitely something to watch out. Offline. So offline, I think, is both a challenge and an opportunity. I think you'll hear later today from View, which is one of our amazing company in the eyewear market. And a lot of the growth in eyewear has been driven by physical stores. And that's mainly because some of those journeys are just better in person, and in particular in eyewear, where you may need an eye test or you want to try out something. There is benefit in having a physical presence, and you'll see more and more, including in Made, for instance, where people are opening showrooms, opening pop-ups, basically recreating that physical experience. The reason I put that as a challenge is obviously it's harder to scale physical stores than a website. So again, I think it's about finding ways to do that in a smart way and obviously not recreate some of the challenges that the retail industry has been facing for centuries. And finally, exits, which is, as dear venture capitalists, what some of us care about, is that category hasn't seen so many exits. And part of it is it's a new category. But Bonobos, I think, was $310 million exit, which for someone who almost invented the category, you could say, could have been disappointed. There has been obviously some good stories in the US, but still, not an obvious compared to obviously marketplaces or even software. No real proof points just yet in that. So the last thing I wanted to touch upon today is how do we go at assessing vertical brands? And that's a bit of a long list maybe for a conference, but I think some of the things we care about is the category, obviously. So I think you can be actually quite scientific about that. So there are categories that are more appealing than others. It's not only about the size. It's obviously about what's the repeat in that category, what's the ability to, to increase your SKUs and develop as a platform, what's the ease of delivery, what's the return pattern. So I think you can actually, be fairly granular about categories. Another thing we care about is differentiation. I think my belief is that those companies are building brands, and while it's great to have revenues and attractive unit economics, I think most of those companies will be based acquired based on the brand. And so I think this needs to be a genuine story, and it can't be just, oh, I've seen that work in the US, I want to create a copycat here. I think you need to have people that are truly passionate, have something to say, have strong design, as opposed to just a playbook. And that's why I think if you look at some of the playbook categories, I think in the UK we had some people trying that and didn't go so far. It needs to be genuine, and there are a few ways you can assess that. I think strong design is one, but the NPS is a good one. I think I'm almost out of time, but some of the other things is affordable prices. So I think there is danger in going too upmarket, and some points around the community, which goes back to how genuine and differentiated those stories are. So that's it for today, and I think you'll hear for some of our companies Made and View later today, but good to be here.